Management and Organization, book editor, entrepreneurial behavior for Emerald Publications, and is also on editorial board of many other journals. So once again, Andrea, we welcome you to Amity University. Thank you so much for specially coming for this conference and accepting our invitation. Now I request you to please take over the session. Thank you.
It's easier here, so I can also read the slide. So thank you very much to Amity University, to Dr. Pallari and Dr. Strada for the invitation and for the conference for making this visit happening. I mean, so far I've only spoken to this conference online last year and last week to a pre-conference workshop, so it's really a pleasure to be here. It is my first time in India and actually in, well, technically my first 6 hours in India in my life. So I already apologize if I'm affected by jet lag and I may, I don't know, shut off while talking, or if my talks is a little bit, more boring than usual, but I just arrived. It's really an honor to be here, and it's really an honor to speak with you and to present this work, because I try to make this presentation a little bit of a journey, because I understand that most of you are PhD students, so you're actually training to become a researcher and to publish. Some are esteemed colleagues, so perhaps what I say may be already well known to them, but I try to make this presentation in a way in which I share my experience in publishing the paper that I'm presenting, and the paper is also a paper that is methodological, so it's actually a guideline that we decided to write in order to improve the way bibliometrics is used in systematic literature reviews, because we think that out there are a lot of bibliometric papers that are of extremely poor quality. So our purpose, let's say, with this is to somehow to contribute with what I and my co-author did for our entire career, and to serve this academia, and not only authors, but also reviewers, in hoping that if you're going to review a paper, you know how actually to do that. So it's a little bit of a journey. I'm going to be totally honest, so I'm not a very formal professor, and I'll try to tell you the truth, only the truth, in this speech, including what was quite unpleasant. So you see, there are some emoticon on my presentation, but this is a work that we started conceptualizing in 2016, and it's been published in September 2024. So sometimes it may take you almost 10 years to actually publish something from the day in which you thought about it, if you want to publish something that is really important. So it's a paper that is dear to me, because it took probably half of my career so far to do it. Of course, I was not every day for 8 years writing it. For a few years, we were just discussing it with our co-author. So we started in 2016 with the idea of making a how-to paper, because we were not satisfied with the how-to papers that were out there. We were not satisfied with ourselves first when we combined bibliometric and systematic literature review on how to justify to the reviewers. So we saw that there were a lot of opinions out there, and we thought, well, actually somebody should do this paper. So we started somehow collecting a lot of we then started in 2018, we started, rather than just discussing the idea, to start having conversation with my first two co-authors on this project, which are Massimiliano Pellegrini from the University of Rome and Giacomo Marzi, that now is a IMT Lucca, but at the time we were both in Lincoln. And then it took us, as you can see, almost 5 years to actually start writing. So for 5 years we were collecting other papers, we were collecting best practices, we were using, of course, all this knowledge for our own papers, but we hadn't started to write much more than a couple of pages of guidance for our PhD students to give them in class when we teach this topic. So we started in 2021. We had Marco Balzano, a fourth member, who joined the team. And at first, we wanted to go to Organizational Research Methods, which is the best journal in the world for research methods. So it's I use the ABS list. Are you familiar with the ABS list? The Chartered Association of Business School list is the main British Association of Business School that ranks journals from 1 to 4, where 4 is the highest. So ORM is a 4 with an asterisk, because at some point they say, oh, well, some journals even better than 4, so they give an asterisk. So we went there, very hopeful. We brought this fantastic paper. We get desk rejected. We get desk rejected with the editor-in-chief, and actually Ivan Zupic, that is coming tomorrow, and I got exactly the same desk rejection this year in 2024 by the same editor on another paper that for systematic literature review. So apparently the editor-in-chief doesn't like it. And the desk rejection was really funny, because sometimes you get, I think I got rejected 300 times in my career, because I published 100 papers. I think at least 3 times per paper there were 3 rejections before actually getting it published. But some are special. This was special because they said, well, 2 years ago we published a special issue on systematic literature review. We do not believe that there is more to be said on this topic, and perhaps your paper would have been better suited if you submitted on that special issue. And I'm like, ma'am, I don't have a time machine at the moment. The special issue was published 2 years earlier, which means that submission started 4 years earlier. We didn't have a draft. I mean, I don't know how am I going to address that. Second point, I was like, I find it quite, as an editor, I find it quite ridiculous that an editor-in-chief of a research methods journal that should lead tells me that enough has been written on a method. So, I mean, AI already existed. I wanted to just reply to say, so what about the paper on AI? You don't need to do that as well? I mean, it's a bit close-minded. Anyway, we said, you know what? Hopeful, let's send it to the second best. International Journal of Management Reviews is the best journal in the world for management reviews. It's specialized. They publish 30 papers per year, only 30, and they receive something like 2,000 submissions per year. So incredibly tough, but they just started a methodology section, because until 2022 they were not even accepting methodological paper, but they started a year earlier. So we thought, well, they haven't published any, let's try. So we get to May 2023, so after almost a year pass, and we get a decision that is a major high risk decision. Now, when an editor makes a major high risk decision, it means that, well, 50-50, you better take the paper elsewhere, because it's really tough. But we're like, no, we are determined. It's like, we're going to resubmit. So it took us 6 months of really hard work, this time almost every day writing. We resubmitted. And then you can see in February 2024, we get another major revision. And we're like, okay, so we had a very little improvement. We went from high risk major to still major. So we resubmit, we work, and then we get a minor, we resubmit. And then in May 2024, we get a conditional acceptance, which normally you would think, I made it. Well, the conditional acceptance letter was 3.5 pages of comments by the editor-in-chief, who apparently had read the paper for the first time, because before that, the paper was handled by 2 different associate editors, a different editor-in-chief, and 3 reviewers. Despite all these people being happy with it, she thought that was not enough. So 3.5 pages. And we were very scared, because it's the first time in my career, and I want to share that with students, because honestly, methodology is important, but I think also building character and resilience to do this job is even more important, and it's experience. It's experience that sometimes you don't have, and it was the first time in my life for an experienced academic that, you still learn. I thought, this is 3.5 pages of harsh comments. What does it mean, conditional acceptance? Does it mean that if she doesn't like even one thing that we do, she's going to reject us? Because normally, you know, conditional acceptance means do a proofreading and you're accepted. But it may also mean do 15 things, and if you don't do one, I reject you. So it's not really an acceptance. But we made it. So long story, we made it, and we don't only publish the article, but the article comes with a website which is fully open access. The article is open access. You will find in the article that the philosophy that we took to actually write this paper was to be usable, and as firm believers that knowledge should be free, because at the end of the day, my salary is paid by the taxpayers in Italy. So the journal don't pay us. So at least it should be open access. So we decided that the whole method that I'm going to present is fully based on open access tools. So everywhere in the world, with whatever means, in any university, can actually use it. And the website has, I will tell you later, a lot of material, including teaching material for professor who wants to teach this course in a PhD program. So what it is about? Up until this paper, there were, so we didn't do anything new, I would say, in the sense that the combination of bibliometric and was there. How many of you are familiar with that? Are you doing a systematic literature review in your PhD? Can you raise your hand if you are familiar, or you heard, or you're doing, or you are told to do? Okay, very few. So I can share that I request all my PhD students so in Italy and in the UK, to graduate, you need to have 3 papers, so a collection of 3 papers. And we make it almost mandatory that the first paper is a systematic literature review, because it's a way to give you the knowledge on the topic. Maybe it will not be published, hopefully yes, but highly, but it's important to do. So the combination of bibliometric, which is a quantitative method to analyze the metadata of our publications, with systematic literature review, which is a method for reading and thematically, let's say, clustering topics from articles and book chapters, it's nothing new. It's been used. I've used it for the last 20 years. But before this paper, there were no guidelines. So you find some papers that they do the systematic first and the bibliometric later. Some papers that they do 2 separate analyses that don't speak with each other. Some papers that do a little bit of both. So it is not clear what's the best practice, how actually this should be done, and as editor and reviewers, how should we evaluate papers that are done in this way. So that's what why we decided to do that. Also, I mean, some motivation you see there. Any topic you put into Scopus, you go on the timeline, you will see an exponential growth on every topic. Because exponential, I mean, we are publishing a lot. I'm not sure it's a good thing, because I think we're publishing more than we can read. But it's also a signal, especially, I mean, in countries like India, in developing countries, and in countries that maybe today are like India was 50 years ago. The sign that we publish more, it means that people from even developing countries are publishing internationally much more, which is actually good. It means that we are creating knowledge not only from United States and the UK, as it was probably 30, 40 years ago. Even Italy was not in the picture if you did a Scopus search in the 90s, okay, of paper published between 1990 and 2000. You will see Italy as nothing. So I think this is important. But at the same time, I mean, PhD students, researchers, if I have to approach a new topic, I need to learn. I need to know what's the literature. How can I do that? I don't know if you anybody studies sustainability in this room, or yeah, you put sustainability in Scopus, you get what, 15,000 papers minimum. If you put sustainability and strategic management, you get 3,000, 4,000 just in the last 3-4 years. how do you understand which one to read? You are a human being. We cannot expect you to read more than 50, 60 papers in your first 3-4 months of writing a literature review, right? So let's be fair. So how do we do it? We can resort to AI. Yes, of course, you can drop them all in ChatGPT, get some summaries, but we cannot put our name on it, because you cannot rely on something that you didn't develop and you don't know exactly how it works. You cannot trust, it may hallucinate, and it's your PhD, it's your paper. Whenever you will publish, there is something that I always remember myself first. You see, there is my name on the paper. Beautiful thing. You get esteem, huge responsibility. My name will be there forever. If tomorrow one of you finds a mistake in our paper, will forever be there with my name on a paper with a mistake. So before actually sending it out, I want to be 100% sure. And if I use AI, I can also. How do we do? Well, bibliometric and systematic literature review, we think, are methods that can really help you to identify. So the whole point of this method is basically to give you a rigorous process to identify the 50 papers that you must read, and have a rigorous process that tells to your supervisor first, who will always find the extra 10 papers to give you, fair enough, but he'll say, this is the process I did, I followed. To the reviewers, to the editor, to the examination committee, you have a process that you can rely on. It's not just out there in this world. Why the combination? Well, there have been a lot of limitations for traditional literature review. So our colleague, Dr. Zupic, he wrote a beautiful paper in 2015 in which he explained bibliometrics, but even in that paper, that probably all of us, if we do a bibliometric, would cite, he says something. He says, pure bibliometric methods focus heavily on quantitative metrics, but they lack depth for conceptual contribution. Yet, as an editor-in-chief, I receive hundreds of papers. 500-600 a year that are pure bibliometric with no contribution whatsoever, and I have to desk reject them all. And that's all time of the people wasted, resources wasted. You do sustainability, electricity, server, computational power, CO2 created to write a paper that shouldn't have been written in that way. Okay? Systematic review, on the other side, they like the rigor. When you do a systematic review, there are many steps that are foggy, in which you have to make a lot of decisions, and you cannot really justify them much. So, but systematic reviews, they are very good to give you the fine-grained and the details and to support your contribution. So the combination of the two makes sense, because in one, you have the rigor, the quantitative aspect, and in the other, you go into the field to understand. Something I forgot to mention. Feel free to raise your hands and ask questions even while I talk. Don't wait until the end, okay? I can talk for the next 6 hours, especially if my Red Bull comes in circulation. So, okay? So, the method is already been used. Of course, here I put mostly the paper that we co-authored, because I'm sure how we used it, not only the paper, but I mean, I can tell you that the article has been published online in October 2024, so 3 months ago, and has been already downloaded in full text more than 12,000 times. So it is having traction on that. But so you're not only you have our article, you already have some articles here that have used the method to publish. So in top journals, because here we have JSBM, Management Decision, and Strategic Change were all Q1 journal. So I think I've mentioned a little bit that. Let's look at this process. I apologize if it's going to be a bit boring, but it's a process of 10 steps, so I'm going to have to go step by step, okay? But hopefully it will be interesting. So this is the overview. We developed 10-step. Well, one of our co-authors has a background in computer engineering from high school, and that's why this looks like a process, an engineering process somehow. And the reviewers in IGMR also told us, you should bring in more philosophy. No. We want to be very understandable. And I challenge you, read the paper. You can easily scan well, there is something in front of the QR code, but you can easily scan the QR code and go to the website and get the paper. If you don't understand it, send me an email. Because so far, to every student we gave it, they said, finally, there is a paper that is written to be understood and it's not written just to be published. So we really fought on that. So we have 10 steps and then 3 methodological checkpoints. So you start with the definition of the research question and the boundaries of the study. Then you move on with the search query definition. You select then the database. Then you will screen the data and cross-check with other databases what you did. And then you're ready to clean and export your data for bibliometric analysis. At this step, so after 5 steps, we put a methodological checkpoint. And I'll explain in more details, but the use of methodological checkpoint is to avoid you bringing an error or a mistake or something until the end. Because one of the issues with bibliometrics and systematic literature review, many people think it's simple, it's easy. Some people even told me, oh, you are teaching automatic systematic review. I said that there is nothing automatic here. It's all pen and paper, I'm sorry. It's a lot of work. But there is this misconception. So if you make a mistake in step 2, meaning your keyword selection, you selected the keyword, you forgot one keyword that is relevant, but you find it out when you're actually writing the paper, you need to repeat everything from that step. Everything. This is a method that you cannot jump in. It's not like an empirical paper or a case study in which you say, oh, I now realize that the paper is finished, but I realize I have another finding. Well, that you can tweak it. You can go back to the paper and modify. Here, you change a keyword, it may change the whole analysis. It may change the cluster, the model, everything. So, to avoid going too far when it's too late to go back, we put these methodological checkpoints that force you to think and to double check what you have done. And they are placed in position of through the process where you will gain knowledge. Because in step 1 and 2, your knowledge is limited. We will see about it. Okay? But when you start screening and cross-checking and cleaning the papers, you will increase your knowledge. Because you may find papers that have keywords that you didn't consider. So it makes sense to go back, okay? Because it's an iterative process. By every step you gain more knowledge, which you may find that this knowledge that you gained was needed before. No problem. Just go back. It's not too late, okay? You pass this, then you start with a big chunk of 3 steps that are the bibliometric analysis. So you will choose which approach to do. You will then identify with the chosen approach the topics, the clustering, the grouping of the themes that emerge, and then you will sample and order the 50 papers that you want to read. Okay, you may start from 10,000, from 1,000, from 200. Okay, and again, you have another methodological checkpoint. Here, a checkpoint that is less technical and more about the meaning, more about, are you actually answering the research question you gave yourself? Because again, it may happen that the literature tells you something new, something that you didn't know at the beginning. And you find out, maybe I need to change the research question. Again, you either go back to the first step or you go back to the bibliometric approach, because maybe your bibliometric analysis is giving you results that you cannot interpret. So you don't continue, you go back and redo it. And then the final 2 steps, one is the systematic literature review, so the actual reviewing and reading of the paper. And the 10th step is about developing the theoretical contribution. Because the issue here is that we have many papers that either stop at step 8, just a bibliometric analysis that looks like a report, but then you read it, it doesn't tell you anything. Okay, that's a paper that can be written probably in a day, more or less. So if you wrote it in a day, or if somebody can write it in a day, why should it be published? You know, it's too simple. Or they stop at step 9. They do the bibliometric, then they do a brief of review in which they describe, they summarize, and that's it. Summarizing a field is not a theoretical contribution. At least it's not a sufficient theoretical contribution to be published. Why should I read the summary? Especially nowadays that I can put the papers in ChatGPT and get a summary. Okay, so why should we? Because imagine, and Rada asked me to fill in with this, not only to present the paper, but also give you tips on publishing, right? So when you submit a paper, well, for each paper, at least I need half an hour of my time to read it and make a first assessment. Then I need an associate editor to look at it a little bit more in depth. So they look at less papers for more time. So a couple of hours of this, again, a senior person. Then we need to find 3 reviewers that, how long does it take to do a proper review of a paper? At least a couple of days, 6-7 hours of work spread, to be fair. So put all this together, calculate the cost. Calculate the cost of 5 senior people working a total of accumulated 30 hours on your paper to then tell you we need to reject it because this paper it's not sufficient. So you can, a lot of questions you can ask them to yourself earlier before reaching that step if you understand that. So many stop at the systematic review, very few, but these are the best papers. And even I co-author paper that stopped at step 8 or 9. Not that it can happen. But the paper that complete the process, they are really good. They are well cited, they are influential, they make a change. So that's, I think, should be the aim when doing a review paper for publication. So let's look at the steps a little bit more in details. So the first step, we called it defining the research question and the boundaries. It is not, as you can see, only about what you want to study. The first action of the step is informal literature scanning. You cannot start writing, and I really weigh my words here. I said you cannot start writing, not you cannot write. You cannot even think to start writing a literature review paper if you don't know anything on the subject. Okay? Yes, you will learn more on the subject, but if you don't have an initial strong understanding, if you don't have strong theoretical foundation on the theories of the subject, where it comes from, what are the main contribution, you're not going to write a good paper. So the first step is really the boring thing that every professor tell you when you start a PhD. Well, I don't know you, but to my students, negotiation, I gave them the book of child of organization, a book of organizational behavior, a book of negotiation, a book of strategic management, and a book of decision making, and a book of research method. And I say, for the first 3 months, you read this. If you have questions, you book an appointment, you come with the book and you tell me the page where you have the question, and we discuss it for as much as it takes. But you read all these 6 books, and each book is 500 pages at least, like a bachelor student. That's the basis. Okay? You should do this. Because if you do that, then much faster. Then you can write paper. Then you know what are you looking for. So let's say you do this first initial literature scanning. You have the foundations. It's nothing more than go on Scopus or Google Scholar and just drop words and read papers randomly. You don't take notes. It's really a flow, okay, to absorb what's the topic. Then By doing that, you will be able to proceed and identify the research gaps. Because if you read sufficient papers, even scanned, even just the abstract, but you understand how the field has been talking about, what are we talking about? Like, sustainability now, ESG. The ESG, it's already old. ESG scholars would tell you that ESG is something that is really old, and there is no point to write papers on ESG anymore. We should write papers with what comes next of ESG, criticizing ESG. Okay, so if your paper is already what is the impact of ESG on the strategy of the businesses in India, it's already old. But if you read the literature, you're like, oh, actually the research gap is what's next. So maybe my research question will be how the ESG discourse for Indian companies evolved, and what are the future directions. That's better. Okay. So let's say we have that. Then you need to set inclusion and exclusion criteria. You need to say, okay, who am I writing for? Am I writing for myself for the thesis and that's it? Am I writing for a book chapter, for a book? Am I writing for an article? Which journal? And you start creating this criteria. Do I want to, am I looking only at literature on developing countries, for example? Do I need to look at the literature from top journals? Do I need to look only English-speaking literature? Or I open up also to other form of literature? These are all questions that you need to, depends, it's your project, okay? But you need to have them from the beginning, because they will constrain how you move forward. For each step, as you can see, we identify the outcomes that you get from the step, so what you get out of completing the step, and some pillars and examples. So in the paper, you have a big table with all the steps and a checklist, and for each step, we provide you, okay, the step is built on these methodological pillars, so the papers we read and summarize to you that you can use, and we provide you 5-6 papers published that are good examples of how to do that step. So you can go read this paper and say, did I do step 1 well according to this? Yes, no. Moving to step 2, you have to identify the keywords. So you have your research question, you know the literature. Now you have to start understanding, okay, which keywords should I use in order to be comprehensive as possible, but also focused? Because sometimes I see papers that say, I want to do a literature review understanding the role of strategic decision making for sustainability. Then, if you start putting decision making and sustainability, it comes everything, because decision and making gives you a lot of studies, for example, about stock exchange and stuff like that maybe you're not interested. So what the author says, well, my keyword was sustainability. Then I look at everything on sustainability, and I manually selected 45 papers from 22,000 that talk about this topic. How? Are you sure you didn't make a mistake? Do we believe that you read the 22,000 abstracts in order to select these papers? Okay, so doing the search string, it's really like mathematics. Because a search string is nothing more than a Boolean equation. So you need to study a little bit of Boolean algebra, the basics. I don't know much about it, but the basics, in order to understand, okay, how to build a Boolean equation that is wide enough to capture what I want, but also narrow enough not to deviate me from what I'm studying. Okay? So you identify these keywords. You will then validate the keywords. So, for example, we also recommend to use a Delphi study. One of my students, what he did is that he contacted 50 professors all over the world and asked, which keywords would you use to study ethical misconduct in corporations? And they returned with something. Then he selected the keyword, and then he sent back and said, Can you rate each keyword from 1 to 5 to what extent you think that this keyword would be useful for research to answer this research question? So he externally validated what he was doing. So you develop it and you have the search string. Again, outcome and examples and pillars on how to develop a search string. You have your search, you need to choose the database. I understand that India is a big fan of Scopus, so good. I'm also quite a big fan of Scopus versus the others. But in this paper, we basically reported 3 databases: Scopus, Web of Science, and Dimensions. Why did we put Dimensions? We don't use Dimensions, honestly, but Dimension is free. So we wanted to be completely open access. So if a scholar is in a university that doesn't have access to Scopus and Web of Science, can still do this with Dimension. Maybe you don't have the full papers, but you can proceed. Okay. There are many reasons why one or the other. For example, I would use Scopus for studies that are on topic related to either developing countries or emergent, very new topics. If instead I'm studying a topic that is historical, very established, like I'm doing, I don't know, a literature review on dynamic capabilities, then I would use Web of Science. Because Web of Science tends to have better journal, but better journal means metrics. Metrics means mainstream. Mainstream in today's world means American. And when you submit to an American journal, well, maybe with data from India you can, but when you submit to an American journal, with data from Kosovo, I have my co-authors in Kosovo. Kosovo is a teeny tiny country that is not even recognized by the United Nations. It was declared independence, and Serbia still thinks that it's their own country. Fantastic place where even if they had war until 5 years ago, they are incredibly fertile for entrepreneurship. The rate of development in entrepreneurship in that country is astonishing, even if it's a country that is still in some parts at war. To me, it makes an interesting case to actually study entrepreneurship in Kosovo. You submit to an American journal, you literally get an editor that says, why would American scholars care about learning something from Kosovo? Maybe you should repeat your study in the Silicon Valley. Not joking. That's what you get. So what I'm saying is that if you are studying, I don't know, the entrepreneurship of rural communities in the mountain regions of India, Scopus is more appropriate, because Web of Science, you're not going to find much on that. Okay, so always make a decision. Here we also include a robustness check. Repeat the string to multiple databases and compare the results that you get to demonstrate that you chose one over the other. There may be cases in which you need to choose both. In the paper, you find a citation of a method on how to merge from 2 different databases. A bit complex, but it is possible. Then you proceed and you do data screening and cross-check. Again, we have pillars and outcomes. You start looking at the data, you remove the duplicates, irrelevant studies. You normally do that with some algorithm, like you select for document type, like I want only peer-reviewed journal articles. I don't want conferences, because I realized that conference papers often are duplicate because people in our field submit to a conference and then publish the paper. So I don't need to have also that. Or maybe I don't want book chapter. Okay. Language, you start removing that. Then you start looking at the quality of these papers. So you start looking at quality indicators. For example, you may decide to only select Q1 journals. Again, if you're studying entrepreneurship in the rural communities of mountain regions of India, you cannot limit your search to Q1 journal, because probably many studies that you want to read are in lower ranked journals, not because are bad studies, but because the topic is a niche, it's small. So always you need to think when making a decision over another. And then cross-verify with other researchers. So in the paper, we suggest that literature reviews should be co-authored with somebody else. I wrote literature reviews single author alone. It's a bit tough, okay? And when you do that, you still need a team. You still need an advisor or some scholars that you contact and you seek advice, or you go to conferences. So you need a counterpart. You cannot do everything in your head alone. Otherwise, you will be biased. Let's assume you're happy. You have your list cleaned, roughly cleaned list of studies in Scopus. You start cleaning and exporting. Here, there are several protocols like Prisma checklist or AMSTAR 2 that we suggest to follow. So nothing new. What we do is that we suggest is to use ABC logic, and we suggest to have multiple researchers to do the cleaning. So that means that every researcher will read all title and abstracts and will just categorize A, B, C, like A fully included, B I'm not sure, C excluded, and then you merge. So, and you look at the inter-rate agreement, and here we suggest to use Krippendorf Alpha. And you also have one of my co-authors created a website with a very simple calculator for your Krippendorf Alpha that you can just upload your Excel file and return. Why to do that? Because increasingly reviewers tell you, how did you select the journals for the articles for the analysis? Why this and not the other? If you're alone, it's your choice. If you are in three, you can say, well, we independently look at them, then we merged, and then we resolve the differences by looking at the paper together, but our agreement score was 0.96. So it means we validated each other, because if we write the same paper and we all disagree on what to include, then it's a bit a problem, right? It's not very robust. We also suggest to do this cleaning in Scopus. So if you're using Scopus, you just, on the step 4, you create a save list. So you save all the search, and then you go into this save list and you start removing what you don't need. Why you need that? Because when you will export for so this method is based on the software Boss Viewer, which is open access, but Boss Viewer is quite old software. It works very well, it's very stable, but it's not fancy. Which means that sometimes if you download the CS book from Scopus and then you play with it, then Boss Viewer will have an error when reading it. So we recommend not even opening the exported file in order not to have errors in the analysis. So to do that, you do the cleaning in Scopus. At the end of this, you will have the exporter CS4 ready for your analysis to use the bibliometric. Here, as I was saying, you stop. You don't go into the analysis. You stop, you go to our paper, you look at the methodological checkpoint, and you follow a checklist. You verify basically clarity and relevance of every step to ensure that you are consistent with the research question you gave yourself, with the inclusion-exclusion criteria you gave yourself throughout the process. Because the biggest risk is that you change your mind. Okay? And you forget what actually you were looking for, because while reading all these abstracts, you got interested in something else, which is fine. But then you need to go back and change the research question. And then you need to go back and make sure that changing the research question wouldn't imply changing the string or changing the database. Okay? Because if I start that I want to look at the rural communities in the mountain regions of India, but then by looking that I found out, actually I should do a literature review on dynamic capabilities. Then maybe Scopus is not the right approach, better Web of Science. Okay? Maybe then it makes sense to have only Q1 journals. Okay, so you see, by changing my research question, it will trigger changes on all the steps. So you don't do anything more in this methodological checkpoint to go through the process again to ensure that it's solid. Questions so far? Okay. Then you move to step 6. You start looking at the bibliometrics. And in bibliometrics, you have two main activities. You have one branch that concerns the bibliometric indicators, also called performance analysis or performance indicators. This is probably very close to what in statistics we call descriptive statistics. Okay, here you do nothing more than describing your sample. So, for how long can you write a paper that is just description? You cannot. Why would you do that? Okay, but you still need a description. Sometimes, maybe, you don't need to put everything in the paper. Okay, so you need to have everything to have a paper, but it doesn't mean that you put everything. Okay, so for example, I don't know, the list of most cited authors in your field. Is it necessary? Well, maybe if the editor-in-chief of the journal where you want to submit is listed, yes, because you please him. Okay, but in reality, is it useful? Depends. It may be, because maybe it's an information that is relevant. It tells me that there is a key author or a group of key authors, or maybe it's scattered. But if it doesn't give me any information that I can interpret, then no need. Okay, so, but here you will look at, how many documents you have, whether they are published, whether people publish mostly single author, like how many authors have a paper on average, geography, where are they from? And with this, you find really interesting stuff. Sometimes you find that, I don't know, you may discover that the main authors of our rural communities in mountain India are Chinese scholars, and you think, how is it possible? And then you go read this paper and say, well, actually, they clearly don't talk about India. How is it possible? Well, because you will find out in your career that there are a lot of fake papers out there. Okay. And then the other branch is science mapping. So this is the more closer to inferential statistics. So this is where we actually make connections of themes. And this is what we will use, not to describe, but to interpret. So it's useful for us for the next steps. And here you have, so basically science mapping analyzes the relationship. So it does nothing more than network analysis among set of items that they could be the documents itself, so the papers, could be the authors, so I could identify school of thought, could be the journals, or the keywords. And you have mostly two main algorithms to clusterize here. The co-citation analysis, which mostly looks at how papers are cited together, which means that looks backward, because for a paper to be cited, it needs to be published, and another paper needs to be published, right? So normally you will have a lag of a couple of years, because by the time one gets published and the other gets read, and then the person who read publishes and cited, and it comes out, it's a process of a couple of years. Which means that the thematic aggregation that you get with co-citation analysis are mostly historical. Okay, so again, if your research question is about the future looking, then co-citation is not very appropriate. If instead your research question is looking at how the field has evolved, yes. Again, if your literature, you're studying sustainability, and the majority of your paper are 2-3 years old, co-citation will not work. It will give you results that are not reliable. Okay, if you're looking at dynamic capabilities and you have 40 years, makes sense. So what's the alternative? The alternative is bibliographic coupling, which basically looks at the commonalities in the reference list of your papers. So one assumes that if two papers are cited by one paper, they speak of the same topic, the three of them. The second assumes that if my paper and your paper share some references, then they must be talking about the same topic. Okay? Since the coupling doesn't rely on citations, because I can have I can analyze even a paper that is published today with coupling, it looks mostly at the future, or it's useful for the future. So, in the cases in which co-citation and historical approach is not appropriate, the coupling performs better. Or when your time of the paper, so from the range between the first year on your dataset and the last, it's small, coupling performs better. Here you have some also pillars, and this is actually from an Indian scholar, Professor Dontu, who was the editor-in-chief of Journal of Business Research for many years. He wrote this paper that it's very simple in terms of what the paper says, but he developed this diagram in which he really did a fantastic job in summarizing all the tools and analysis on bibliometrics. So it is a paper that we say it's quite useful to understand what's available and what's out there. So, as I was saying, we use VOSviewer, and in VOSviewer you will have three types of analysis. Each analysis will give you a different interpretation. When you make the interpretation in VOSviewer, you have to do it with the program, because the program is in Java and it's dynamic. So, you know, if you have, on this slide deck, I don't have an example of the map, but you will have a network map with all the papers clusterized. By passing the cursors on each paper, it will tell you which paper it is, what all the data. So, and that's what you need while you write or you interpret. So if you just export the picture, you cannot interpret much. And we suggest to use the three analyses in combination, because the network analysis basically tells you what's the distribution of the papers, so the cluster. Whether papers are closer to each other, whether they are more relevant. You see, it gives you all this information to understand which papers to read. We are getting there, right? The density, it tells you the whether the paper is more homogeneous, so whether in some cluster that is more density of studies or scarcity. So again, you can understand even the gaps, because where there is less density, it means that it's understudied, and you could ask yourself why it's understudied. Is it a topic that it doesn't make sense, or is it a topic that maybe is interesting? And finally, the overlay gives you the timeline. So it tells you, you may find out that some clusters were actually started earlier than others. So you can trace the historical evolution of the field by looking at this picture. So let's assume that you identified the bibliometric analysis, you chose coupling, you ran your analysis. Now you need to identify clusters. To identify clusters, here, I mean, I could probably speak for the next 2 days, because it's a subject of an overall course, but I basically recommend you to look at the paper and also at the VOSviewer manual, because it's how to use the program. But in the paper, we give you some advices, because VOSviewer, you will see that there's a lot of parameters such as the resolution and the cluster size. And these parameters, until our paper, were never validated. So every author, even myself, I would go in VOSviewer and adjust them until I got a figure that I can explain. So not very scientific. So but what we did is that we looked at the best papers published that use VOSviewers, and we looked at what parameters they reported. And we came to the conclusion that we recommend to keep the resolution at 1, and then give the program a minimum cluster size of 10% of the overall data set. Why? Because if you have 10,000 papers and you have a very high resolution, BossViewer will come up with 200 clusters. How can you write a paper described in 200 clusters? How can you make sense of 200 clusters? You want clusters normally between 3 and 8, to me, okay? In order to receive that, no cluster should be smaller than 10% of the data set. And we found out that this actually has been consistently used. So you identify the cluster, and then in BossViewer, you will look at each cluster, what are the papers in each cluster, and you start getting an understanding of what the topic could be. This is your interpretation. The program doesn't tell you what the cluster is about. The program tells you this paper, according to what you asked me to do, sit next to each other. Now, do they sit next to each other because they like each other, or do they sit next to each other because there was no space elsewhere and they are randomly allocated? That is your job, and we go back to step 1. If you don't know the topic, it's very difficult to make this interpretation. Okay? Once you have made the interpretation, you will assign labels. So you may have that, I don't know, the literature on rural communities is mountain India is developed between sustainable development, ruralities and identity of the local communities. Okay, so you start looking at papers that tackle different aspects, and possibly they look at the aspect from different theoretical lenses. So at the end of this, you will have the clustering, your clustering, and you will have all the graphics for your paper ready with your interpretation. We also provide you with some strategies on how to fine-tune the cluster. So there are several strategies here. I normally use the first one, which is iterative resolution adjustment. So you adjust until you get cluster. But for example, a few years back, I wrote a paper that was an update on a previous paper. So there was a paper that was written 10 years earlier on a field, and I did the 10 years update of that paper. So what I already had the clusters that were identified. So I used this knowledge. So I did this comparative cluster analysis in order to compare my cluster analysis with the previous 10 years to understand whether the clusters are different, because I would expect that some stay and some new emerge. Okay, so there are several techniques that you can explore. Again, every technique is appropriate for depending on your research question, what is your topic, and how we structure your data set. Now we are in the useful step of, okay, Andrea, you told us all these beautiful things. I may still have 1,000 papers. What do I do? What do? You basically calculate what we call composite bibliometric influence score. There is the formula in the paper. Basically, it's a score that takes into account the normalized citation that the paper received. Meaning, and it's a score that helps you to compare the papers, because if you use the total citation, of course, a very old paper will have more citation than a new paper. The normalized, you normalize it by the year. So you compare each paper with every paper published in that year. So more fair assessment. So, and citations, we know it's a metric of impact, right? So the first element is that. Then we have also the total links. So how many links the specific paper has with the rest of the data set. Because we assume that the more link it has, the more the paper is central to our network. So not only well-cited paper, but also central. And then the third is the link strength, because we don't only want many links, we also want the strength of this link. All these numbers BossViewer gives you, but separate. So the innovation that we made here is to say, we need to look at all the three of them and we developed a formula to do that. Once you have this indicator, this course, the CBIS, you basically have a number that tells you to compare paper with paper. A number that is not influenced by the age of the paper, but is exclusively influenced by its impact and position in the network. So the higher the number, the more important the paper for you is to read, because you want to read papers that are influential and impactful. So you can rank the 2000 papers that you have. Not only that, you can rank them by cluster. So you have your 5 clusters. Each cluster has 200 papers. You can rank them. And then you say, but Andrea, how many papers should I select? Because the reviewers will always want me to read more. I said, no, because with this paper we went to see the best papers published with the method, and we found out what's the magic number. So the magic number is at least read 10% of the papers in each cluster. So if you have 100 papers in each cluster, read the first 20. Then in one cluster maybe 18, because it's like qualitative analysis. Maybe you reach saturation at 18, maybe you go to 22, 25, 30, because you say, no, actually, I normally do this thing. I give myself a threshold and I read also the next. And if I find the next very interesting, I read the next. And I keep going until I read the paper that like, oh, I already read this topic, so I don't need to read further. As a final data set, we found out that impactful systematic literature reviews published with bibliometric aid normally have a final data set of 100 papers plus minus 4. So with 60 papers, you can publish very high quality systematic literature review. You don't need 2000. Okay? Actually, we found out that when there were too many papers, the resulting paper was not really a good paper. Because how can you make sense of reading 2000 papers? You don't read them. You declare, you read them, and the end is not a very good paper. So now, basically, you have all your analysis done, you know the cluster, and you have the list of papers to read. So you are ready to go and read the paper, all these papers, and write the final end of that paper. Again, methodological checkpoint. Go backward to make and ask yourself, am I getting results that I expected? Do they make sense? Can I interpret them? Are these 20 papers that I pre-selected, you read them? Do you think that they are all relevant? Because if half of them is relevant, then there is a problem in the data set. Okay? You are selecting papers that are not, you didn't clean well. So you go back to the step of cleaning. Finally, you are ready for systematic literature review. So the difference is that you are not doing a systematic literature review from scratch. You are doing the literature review of the papers that you ranked and selected, and you have a relative, let's say, certainty or a rational certainty to believe that these papers are important. And so far you have a process that tells you, yes, these are important. Here, we don't say much different than any literature review, because of course the method is established from many years, but we bring in some guidance on the concept of having 2 types of eyes when you review. You need to have an holistic view and a cluster-specific view. So you need to be able to do both. And with bibliometric you can, because you could, by looking at the figures and the cluster, you can make all the interpretation and the comment on the big picture. So how the topics interact, how they evolve. And then you can go in each cluster and make a systematic literature review. And if your data set is very large, we would suggest to repeat the bibliometric clustering in each cluster. So you create a subset, you reanalyze it. In this way, you will not find cluster, but you will find what we call subcategories. So you will find that within a big cluster, there is further. You can also do that for yourself. So the same topic, you have 200 papers per cluster. You read 20, but then you say, I may miss a lot. Okay, then do a bibliometric analysis of those 200. Understand how they move. Understand the 20 you selected, where they are, and you have the story of the cluster. So it's much easier to create a narrative in this way and to create a paper that actually engages the reader and provides some meaning. So you should use PostViewer while you are writing and while you are reading papers. That's very important. Finally, you develop theoretical contribution. So our life would be much easier if we would stop at describing the cluster and telling the story of the field, but then every journal will tell you, how are you advancing knowledge on this topic? If you just tell us what others wrote, what's your take? And here we put some guidance to, with especially more than the guidance that we do, is that we provide you with a literature review of papers that are useful to understand how to create a theoretical contribution. So it's like a curated reading list for you. And there are many approaches, okay? So each approach depends from your objective. Because if you want to assess core assumption or problematize, you're not going to create a research agenda. While instead, if you are actually taking stock of the literature and looking forward, then a research agenda makes sense. Okay? You may create a taxonomy or a conceptual framework because you find out that this topic is not well explained and there isn't an interpretive framework that can be used. And here my advice is, what I tell to every scholar that I meet is, ask yourself, can you teach a lecture with the paper that you're writing? Can you go in front of a class and present it to bachelor students for 15-20 minutes? Will they understand and learn something? If the answer is yes, then you have a good paper. Then you are developing theory and then you are doing a good service. If you struggle to present it, to teach it, not to present it to a conference, but to teach it, then maybe something wrong. Okay? Because at the end of the day, the knowledge that we develop is to teach. Okay, we do research to publish because students may read what we publish and learn something, not just because our name is there and we get some citations. So we provide extensive guidance on each theoretical aspect, how to use BSLR. So I'm not going to go into that because it's going to be otherwise a dreadful afternoon of reading, but it's all there. And then you arrive at the final methodological step. So you check that the contribution you arrived, so you do what I told you. Can you teach it? In a nutshell is, can you teach what you develop? If you can, like when we were writing this paper, I'm very satisfied of it because usually I don't think I can give a course on any paper that I wrote. I can give maybe a 10 minutes lecture spot, okay? With this one, we develop basically a PhD course because in Trento I teach 20 hours to PhD students of bibliometric systematic literature reviews, and it's all based on a single paper. So I thought, okay, when we did this step on our paper, because we repeated the process on our paper as well, and we thought, well, yes, we think there is a contribution. Looking forward, expanding. BSLR is already old because, of course, it took us 4 years to actually get it published. We started when AI didn't exist. Now AI exists. topic modeling with Ivan Zupik that you will see tomorrow at the conference as well. We are actually under submission. We brought a paper on topic modeling and systematic literature reviews. Also, I mean, this method can be used, for example, for not only for systematic reviews, but also for integrative reviews or for problematizing reviews. Because I was mentioning, when you look at the density diagrams in PostViewer, you can see the gaps. And those gaps may mean that there are assumptions that must be challenged. And you here have an advantage toward me. I grew up fully and I was trained fully on Western theories. I'm Italian, my heritage is the Roman Empire, Latin. The Roman Empire is the foundation of the Western civilization. So speak with Americans, we all come from that, right? The Roman Empire didn't arrive to India. And it's not that India didn't exist and didn't have a civilization during the Roman Empire, right? You had empires. I mean, I was visiting Oman and I was actually learning how Oman had a great empire at the time of the Roman Empire that actually was even bigger. Okay? China. So you come from a culture that it's not mainstream, I would say, in the business arena. Therefore, you can use this to challenge the assumptions of the theories that we study that are mostly developed by professors like me that know a very little part of the world, or by Americans that they are simply the most powerful economic country in the world. It doesn't mean that they know the truth, okay, of how the world should function. So I really think, you know, every time I have to say my biggest disappointment is when I read the paper that comes from India, and you read the paper and you think it could have been written by a Brit, an American, a German, an African, an Australian. There is really nothing new in this paper. Why they are not bringing forward something more interesting, something that we don't know? Why they are not telling us? And I mean, or in China with Confucianism, it's fantastic. There are cultural prescriptions that are totally different from how we reason, from how we teach people to reason. You know, they don't think linearly, they think recursively. And that's a major paradigm shift, even for business, because the old business theories, you know, from accounting strategies, all linear. We teach you linearly because it comes from American scholars during World War II, step by step. Even this paper is linear. Okay? We mentioned is iterative, that makes a bit of circularity in it, but I really think that these are, you really have a great opportunity to develop knowledge that it's relevant and it's interesting, and where I would say I can also learn. So I think it's up for you. What else? Okay. Thank you very much. I think that's all. I also have some more slides with the resources, but on our website you have the full paper, you have the teaching resources, you have, if you are a colleague and want to teach this, you have a syllabus ready with the reading list, with the description, with the learning outcomes, all open access. You can use it as long as, of course, you give credit to those who develop. So thank you very much. I'll be happy to take any question you feel to answer.
Second is WordSphere. You mentioned about two of the softwares in your presentation. One is WordSphere and second one is Triple Alpha. Is there any other software that can be used to do BSLR?
Okay, so Criterion Alpha, you don't need a software. There is a website that it's not a software, it's a calculator.
Okay.
It's nothing more than the formula in Excel for you not to go and do all the formulas, because there is a little, like, the algorithm is not super simple. Other softwares. Here, these are all the softwares that you need for BSLR. We recommend PostViewer because it's more stable. I was in love with Bibliometrics, which is a package for R. And why I was in love? Because it's incredibly simple, except that it's not stable. It's not stable because I found myself that I repeated the analysis with the same data set 6 months after, and it gave me different results. And that scared me a lot. Because when you publish a paper, post viewer, even if they update the software, the algorithm is dead. Bibliometrics, for example, currently, the new version of Bibliometrics, there are some functions that don't work anymore because it doesn't, they make a change and it doesn't read well the nationality of the scholars, so you cannot do any analysis based on nationality. And then maybe tomorrow they improve it and something else. So honestly, I don't know, life is too short to go after a software that doesn't work properly. Then, I'm a heavy user of Excel. I don't think you need many things. Also, AI, like advanced AI, like ChatGPT or Sonnet by Claude. I think these advanced tools, they can support you probably with some of the calculation to speed up some parts of the process, not on the interpretation, but more on calculating scores and so on.
In seventh step, cluster topic identification, you mentioned about three of the visualization: network, density, and overlay. Overlay being the temporal, network about the intensity, and this density about the intensity, and network. You mentioned three of the visualizations. Is there any more visualizations which uh, could be like this is a standard visualization?
No, and I cannot think of different visualization. Bibliometrics does some difference because there are also some visualization based on the bag of words aggregation or matrices that somehow link the position of the cluster with the prominence, but I'm not a huge fan of it. What I would say is that if you are approaching this for the first time, play with it. Repeat the analysis with the bibliometric and post viewer, learn the nuances, the differences, and then pick what is relevant for you.
Thank you.
Forward. Any other question? Thank you very much for giving me your time to listen to me. Thank you.
On behalf of all the PhD scholars and the faculty of MIT, I would like to thank Dr. Professor Andre Caputo for his deep insight into the how one can increase the chances of publication. Like we have heard maybe in many talks, the mantra of the present time is smart work, not hard work. So all the 10 steps basically talks about how one can work smartly. So one is to work very hard also, but apart from working very hard, one is to look into, like, from the very first step, how one can identify the gap and how one can use the AI. So since we have the AI in the market, so we should use AI a lot so that we can increase the chances of publication. And in the end, like, since we have 2 more days, so we look forward for more interaction with Professor Andre in the next 2 days. And in the end, I would like to thank all the volunteers and IT support for the smooth execution of this workshop. Thank you, sir, once again from the behalf of all the PhD scholars and the faculty. Thanks. Thank you. Now we can, yeah. You have a question?
This is a very. Can you repeat the question so everyone can?
Sir, you mentioned that we can use any AI tool too for that for the for the analysis. So won't that be counted in the part of plagiarism?
Not necessarily. Depends how you use it. So if you use AI to do the interpretation, that's probably not plagiarism because you're not plagiarizing anything, but it's unfair use of the AI because you're all claiming ownership of an intellectual contribution that is not yours. If instead you're using AI for, I don't know, you do the interpretation of the clusters, then you write some notes, and then you put in an AI and say, can you write a paragraph based on these notes? But the flow, the logic is yours. I don't think that's unfair use. I think that's fair if you disclose it. So many journals are going toward this AI disclosure. Some are taking even too far. I was submitting to a conference recently and they were asking me all sorts of questions, but they were meaningless. I think we will, because at some point, I think if we need to make a statement on the use of AI for every paper, then how about making a statement on the use of research assistant? Who collected the data? The use of work from master students or bachelor students for publishing? About the use of which statistical software you use, if the coding, you wrote the code, or if the code you found it online. I mean, or potentially then you need to have a statement on everything, which is called the method section. So you should report exactly what you do, especially in systematic literature review. One of the key pillars of SLR is replicability. So if I review your paper and have a systematic review, the first thing that I do is that I repeat your query and I see if I get the same result. So in the method, you need to explain everything in order for anyone to assess what you did. So I think that probably disclosing AI in the method is the future in which you will say at step 8, I used AI to help me find the label for the clusters. How did I use it? I input in the AI the titles of each paper and I ask AI, how would you call a cluster that includes this paper? Then I receive some answer, I refine, and these are the final clusters. To me, as long as you say, as an editor, I wouldn't repeat. No worries.
Hello, I have two questions. First, from publishing point of view, if I'm writing purely bibliometric paper, is SLR necessary?
If you want to publish in a good journal, yes.
Okay.
So a purely bibliometric paper was in fashion and publishable, I think, up to 5-6 years ago.
Okay.
All the papers that I publish after that or attempt publish bibliometrics have been either incredibly difficult or you have to go to a lower range. So I would probably always put an SLR unless there is a reason for doing only a bibliometric paper, such as very big data set. You wouldn't have the space to put also SLR because you already described and the bibliometric is sufficient for you to have a theoretical contribution, then okay. But I think it's more the exception.
Okay. And second question was, so for example, if I extracted the data in say August 2024 from Scopus after cleaning and everything, but the writing of the paper, the second part of it, say from step 6 to 10, it took me like say 3 to 4 months to analyze and write the paper, and now it's Jan 2025. Will it be still relevant, the paper?
So
Because again, it will take another 3 to 4 months submitting, publishing.
potentially you never end.
Yes.
Exactly. So no. Serious journals and serious editors and reviewers know that. So for example, International Journal of Management Reviews, they have a policy that they say the time stops when you submit the paper. So if the paper has passed editorial checks, the reviewers cannot ask you to update the dataset. And you are never asked during the process to update. So that's very important. A tip. The best time of the systematic review paper and bibliometric paper are like yogurt. They have an expiration date. And they have a best time of the year also to do it. So my suggestion is to write them probably in February, between February and March, to do the search, because this will allow you to have the full metadata of the previous year, and you have a complete year for comparing. If you do it in August, you have 8 months of 1 year and then the other years. It's a bit tricky to compare, okay? Possible, but tricky. And then finish the paper by November, December to submit, because in this way you frame the reviewers. The papers will not be perceived as old, because if you do the paper in June 2023 and then it takes you until June 2024 to submit, it feels it's older than if you start in January and submit in December, even if it's still 12 months. Okay.
Thank you so much.
No worries.
Do we have any more questions? Anyone? We still have Dr. Andre Caputo for the next 2 days. The conference is starting from tomorrow. So in case if any PhD scholar, they want a more detailed interaction with sir, so you can find free time tomorrow, maybe between the tea breaks or between the lunchtime, where in one-on-one, you can have a more detailed interaction with sir.
Actually, please do that, because I flew here to meet people, not to just talk at the distance. Okay, so come and say hi. I don't bite.
Okay. So tomorrow, between the breaks time and the lunch time, you can have a detailed interaction, one-on-one. Thanks a lot. I thank everyone once again for being a good, say, listeners and patients for the workshop. Thank you very much. You can break now. You can leave.